So hi everyone, welcome to Blameless's first rebooted industry panel. So we used to host these, but it's been about a year since we've hosted one of these industry panels, and this is our first one. I'd like to start off with asking all of our participants to tell me what their name is and what you do for a living. So we'll start with Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Yu. I work at Goldman Sachs. I've been in the industry for about 17 years and done a whole range of things from, say, Unix system administration, storage, through to managing CI/CD tool chains, DevOps, SRE, and more recently, running enterprise architecture, as well as a risk management program at the firm.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Tony?
Tony Hansmann. I used to be a sysadmin too, started in 1994, working on System 5 Release 3. So I was a line sysadmin right up through essentially about 2014 when at Pivotal didn't have sysadmins like that. They just had developers. They sent me to a development team and they decided, oh, we do need sysadmins. And they called them SRE. And there you go. So I helped at Pivotal productize all those kinds of things you have to do to run operations. And so my focus these days is on the transformation that you can do with your business using these tools.
And Kurt?
I'm Kurt Andersen, and I just about a month ago joined Blameless as SRE Architect role, which is sort of a made-up title. It's focused on strategy for the product and for the company. So I previously was with LinkedIn and working in the product SRE team there for about 8 years.
And Kurt and Vanessa are participants or run SRE cons, is that right?
Yeah, I've had the pleasure to work with Kurt on a number of SRE cons.
Yep. I've been involved with the steering committee for SRE Con and try to help chairs be successful as a liaison from the Usenix board to the chairs. And Vanessa had one of our unfortunately virtualized events last year that she
canceled due to COVID,
put together. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, my name is Chris Hendrix. I am a staff software engineer and developer evangelist here at Blameless. The way that these industry panels are going to work is we have 3 kind of pre-created topics that we're going to do a roundtable discussions about, and then at the end of it, an open Q&A for all of our attendees. So to all of our attendees, please feel free to utilize our Q&A function to send us questions, and we will attempt to get to them in the last 10 minutes of this discussion. So today's panel is focused on the idea of organizational transformation, or SRE as organizational transformation. And I actually chose this topic after reading Vanessa's essays in the recently published 97 Things Every SRE Should Know, which Kurt also has some essays in. But Vanessa's essays were talking about, SRE in the enterprise and affecting SRE cultural changes in the enterprise. And that was a very dear topic for me because I actually come from a consulting background at Pivotal with Tony, where it was our job to think about the transformation of other organizations, and organizational transformation was our bread and butter. And I think a lot of our attendees might be participants in an SRE transformation. So they might be SRE or DevOps ICs or managers, but I don't know how many of them are necessarily like strategists in the SRE adoption process or are thinking about the strategy of SRE adoption kind of as an active process of change. So I actually wanted to start there in this discussion, maybe starting with Vanessa since I mentioned you, but can you tell me more about your experiences with the process of SRE adoption? Have you seen it take different amounts of time? How long have you seen it take? Were there steps along that process that were particularly impactful or tricky?
Yeah, so I guess let me start from like right at the beginning. So the SRE journey at our organization started about 3 years ago. And at the time, I think we kind of knew we wanted SRE, but not necessarily what we want SRE for, right? And so I think we actually spent a fair amount of time figuring out where are the places in the organization where, SRE can bring like the most value. And to give you some context of like the size of the organization, we're talking about over 11,000 engineers, right? And it is a firm that's over 100 years old. We've got all sorts of different systems serving different businesses at different, stages of maturity, if you like. Some systems have been around for a long time. Some are almost like startups where we're building new. So again, trying to figure out, okay, well, where's the best place to start with SRE, and where it can be the most effective was something that we actually spent a fair amount of time thinking about. And then we quickly realized two things: that there is really no one size fits all, right? And at the time, I think the SREs in our company had only ever experienced SRE in a certain way, right? And that wasn't necessarily going to scale or work for us. And so to give you some example, we knew that, for external facing systems where we need very high availability, perhaps it makes sense to have embedded SRE teams, right? Where they are really, on call, they're doing the support, they're very involved in the whole lifecycle management of the product, right? That's a no-brainer, but not every one of our service needs that, right? There are definitely internal services that may not need that level of SRE investment. And so then we also decided, okay, maybe SRE can help kind of also, I guess, teach others the SRE core discipline, right? And make sure they understand, SLOs, concepts around toil elimination, but not really going the full works, right? And investing in like a full embedded SRE team. So, we quickly figured out that there are many ways of doing SRE, and, we will need to do different things along the way.
Yeah. Same questions let's start with Tony.
Okay. Boy, if I can recall the question.
Sure, it's about the process of SRE adoption.
The process to me. So I like I don't know if anyone, we promoted on Twitter. So I'm a Simon Wardley fan. And so you're going to be in a pioneer or a settling or a town planning or an industrialist phase on a, just as Vanessa says, right across the board. What I found when I went to most organizations, so in the Fortune 500 or so, was that they didn't have much of a basis, and you had to start as a pioneer in SRE. Yeah. And so it goes right back. I mean, what we did is we taught SLOs, SLIs, and SLAs and how they're actually related, and how to have a half-hour conversation about them without getting lost in the definition of the acronym, because that is actually a real problem. We would teach. To me, SRE is, when you say our organization would like to adopt SRE models, you're saying, I want to be a grown-up IT shop. You're saying, like, we're willing to work on budgets. We're willing to make promises. We're willing to make revisions to those promises. And so the start process to me is, find one person who has this under their pillow, the Accelerate book, right? And they're like, there you go. Vanessa's got it right there, right? You have to have, I'm looking for 6 people across a, Goldman Sachs, across a 50,000 person organization. I need 5 people who care, 6 people who care. And then we have to identify a path to production, totally standard lean thing. We identify a path to production, and we find the friendliest team on that path to production. And we say, hey, can we try a few things? There are these 4 golden signals to measure. Can we just measure yours? We don't need you to do anything new. We just want to measure those. Can we ask you to make promises about SLOs? Not even an SLA, just service level objective for you that you monitor internally. And on it goes. But the basic thing is we work with one team on the ground to make sure that they are eliminating toil. We teach them pain snakes and other ways to identify toil. And we say, great. As soon as you're happy with the result, like, oh my gosh, we never thought we could do this. Transformation means something that used to be expensive or really hard is now like goes away categorically or is pretty easy to do. That's what transformation means in an organization. When we find something that is a eureka moment, oh my gosh, we never thought we could, blah, blah, blah. Great. As soon as we get a team like that, we want to introduce them to the next adjacent team in that path to production. And we want them to tell their story about how their upstream or downstream just got a little better. And are they willing to join a journey like that? That's it. That's the pioneer phase of it. And that's where almost every organization I've ever walked into is at. Does that answer it, Chris?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Kurt, did you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would while not taking anything away from that model, because I see that all over the place, and I talk to people at the conferences, and they're usually in the throes of that early phase, maybe with or without management support that sort of helps protect them and support their experimentation. I think there's another model, which can be the crisis model, and I'll harken back even before I joined LinkedIn, back to circa 2010, when LinkedIn had just gone public, 2011, 2010, somewhere in there. We were in merge hell, and I'm taking these stories sort of third hand, but every time there was a release to production, the site would be down for a week while all the problems got worked through, and people would have sleeping bags in the office, and just it was the typical, I mean, one of those typical war stories where life is horrible and everybody's burning out. At the time, what turned into the SRE organization consisted of like 8 people. Obviously a much smaller LinkedIn at that time. And LinkedIn undertook a fundamental cultural change. They said, this is not working, this will not scale, this will not go forward. We are going to change. And part of it was that the company was small enough at the time that you could do that across the board sort of commitment. And it was a commitment from the top level of the engineering organization, the CEO, and they just said, what we have isn't working, we need a new model. SRE is the way forward. They brought in some key leaders and just developed the whole practice from there de novo.
That sounds like the dream. I mean, it's not often that you come into an organization that's willing upfront to really invest all the way through the management structure into something like this, which is, I think, where a lot of the tension that people who are working on transforming either their organization or other organizations are really interested in. And you also pointed to crisis as being this key aligner. And Jonathan Smart talks about that in Sooner, Safer, Happier about crisis. And in particular, alignment between the business and the engineering objectives, which is a key principle, I think, in site reliability engineering principles. That does actually bring us to our next topic, which is to what degree is the SRE adoption process about changing people's minds versus changing people's behaviors? And is there a meaningful difference? What is the tension that exists between those two? And what kinds of thoughts need to change versus what behaviors need to change in an organization? Maybe let's start with Kurt and work our way backwards this time.
Sure. That's a really interesting question, because one of the things I like to do at the SRE conferences sometimes is run an unconference session. And in Dublin 2019, we had an unconference session, and one of the topics that the group participants decided to sort of explore was this idea of you've tasted SRE, you know what SRE is. What would it take for you to not be able to see things that way anymore? And essentially they came to the conclusion that there's really, once you start looking at things in this way, once you start caring about reliability and a systems-wide perspective, it's just extremely, you can't stop seeing things that way. And so there is a very important mindset or paradigm shift that happens. But I think that can be facilitated through the practices that people can go through the motions for a little while, and then things will just click and they'll start seeing things differently.
Yeah, Tony?
Yeah, that's the, what behavior needs to change. You have to go to a group that believes positive change is possible, right? If they're just like, hey, we've been ground down by this organization for 30 years, get out. I mean, we've probably all been in that room. Like these folks management structure disallows it. But the behavior that you have to, the mindset that you have is like, hey, are you willing to look? This, like, the non-ability to return to comfortable ignorance. That's what you're looking to, that's the transformation hook. And so you hook that by saying, look, we're just going to ask you, we're going to let you complain all day. And then we're just going to circle some of those complaints, like finance is too slow. Okay, well, we can't deal with that one, right? Now, we can't get our machines as fast as we want. That's a different concern. And maybe we can address that concern. And so when I'm looking to bootstrap that things can change thing, you're usually looking at it seems like an intractable problem that you can split a little bit. And when you split it, some toil goes away and people are like, wait a minute. And if you fix something like finance is slow versus I can get my machines on time, they'll just open the map and they'll be like, well, I don't like this and I don't like this and I don't like this. As soon as you get a team to that, you have everything you need. Right? And then you just pull out the book. You're like, oh, we're just going to start making promises that we're going to actually track and understand something about. And then that's the behavior change. As soon as people are like, I do need to know. I need to know my saturation. That actually seems really critical to know. And I don't know how I haven't known it all this time. Anyway, so that's the two behavior change, the behavior change and the mindset change. And as Kurt says, you drive, it's a holographic problem, right? You don't get to choose one or the other. So
yeah, that's part of the intractability usually is behavior comes with mindset, mindset comes with behavior. Vanessa?
Yeah, so my take is definitely you need both in order for SRE to be successful in the long term, right? I mean, if people don't believe or see the value in doing something, they're just not going to do it. Or, even if you make them do it for a short time, they'll revert back to the same patterns, right, from before. And I think a lot of the times is, people are just in their comfort zone, right? They've been doing things a certain way. And so they might not necessarily want to change. And so, that in conjunction with, I talked about the scale problem that we have in, organization. One of the things that, we thought about in terms of how to actually drive the behavioral changes is actually to think about where we have gaps with our tools, our processes, right? And then actually put in the right structures in place or build the right processes so that people don't have to really think about it, right? This is the natural path that they will go down. They will use these tools and then, they will end up with having a better, production running experience as a result, right? And that naturally drives the long-term change in behavior. And I think that's really important for things to stick. Right. It has to be what they do day to day as opposed to be something addition that they have to think about.
Yeah, so
that model is called the golden path or the paved road. A lot of organizations adopt that by making it easy to do the right thing. And you can do other things. If you want to go bushwhacking, you can, but it's on your own.
Yeah. Vanessa, you speak in your essays about incentive structures. And how you can kind of design incentive structures in order to make doing the right thing, easy and reinforced. Do you have any kind of examples of like what might be incentivized for either a team that's like mature in their SRE journey or early in their SRE journey, or what the rewards themselves could be?
Yeah, I mean, on the ground, the incentives is often just what you gain by doing toll elimination, right? Like you're going to have a much better experience when you're on call. You're not going to be up at 3 a.m., etc. So I think making sure people understand that the investment up front will mean that they'll reap some of those rewards down the line is important. Other things are just kind of, for example, like transparency and, management also reinforcing that, they see someone do the right thing and they call that out, right? And, they make that known to the broader organization, like wins that we have, and which we publicize as well internally. I think, those are also things that will, over time, incentivize the right behaviors across the organization. They see model behavior, and then, they will kind of, other people will want to kind of like mimic that, right, or replicate that.
Yeah, absolutely. People talk about failure walls being something you might want to implement. So being very open and honest about the things that you've learned that didn't go well, or the incidents that you've had that you learned from, but obviously there was an incident to begin with, which is, no one enjoys being a part of. But for management and leadership to really publicly value the fact that people are being transparent about when something didn't go well.
Yeah.
Kurt or Tony, do you have any ideas of incentive structures or other things that might be incentivized?
The thing that I look for is, we talk about if you have top level air cover, you can do a whole category of things. It's just nice. If if you read the Accelerate book and you're like, we have to do this, and you're that pioneer, radically harder. And so I actually advise that pioneer to go start with building trust interpersonally. Hey, I'm a person who's really interested in understanding the 4 golden signals and explaining how that works to the business. That's like, if that's who you are, then just find 5 other people who care about something like that and band together and start building trust. Identify your managers and convert them. Hey, we think that this is meaningful. I'm not going to let it go. I want it part of my development plan. My target is in 6 months that we have your boss. You are converting your boss just like I'm converting you. And that's what we're going to do so that we build the scaffolding. The software has been written for 10 years, 5 years. The software has been written for 5 years, right? The tools have been out there for a long time. Lean is old. And that's all we're doing here. And so if you're that initial pioneer, start building trust internally, because SRE is a broader model of trusting across the organization. That's what it's for. And higher trust means lower friction. Lower friction means better iterations. And so there you go. That's how I want to kick it.
Yeah, sorry, I wanted, Tony, could you talk about what those 4 golden signals were? We might have attendees who have never heard of those.
Let's see. Error rate, saturation rate. Is it mean time to recover?
I think so, yeah.
Mean time to recover. Some people use mean time between deploys as a quality metric as opposed to recover.
Are you talking about the signals in Accelerate?
Yeah.
The measures, the metrics in Accelerate. Yeah.
They're also in the Google SRE book. For those folks who are putting their toe in the water, the Google SRE book is amazing for Google. Right, you are going to have to do something radically different, right? You're going to have to start at the bottom probably. So read the Google SRE book and dream in it, awesome. But what you're going to have to do on the ground is going to be different.
I actually recommend people start with the workbook,
right?
First, which was the second one that came out.
That's what we would say at Pivotal too. Like the SRE book is great, but start with the handbook because that's where they're actually teaching you what you can do on the ground.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris, you had a specific question and then I started talking.
Oh, no, that was fine. I had wanted to also know if Kurt had anything to talk about incentive structures or incentivizing good behavior.
Really, to me, one of the key aspects is because collaboration and trust, and Tony touched on this, is so critical to the effective work for SREs. I think that encouraging people in terms of psychological safety is really important. And you can do that, as Vanessa pointed out, through holding up examples of good behavior, but it also plays out in terms of being willing to intervene when people are exercising bad behavior. And this shows up a lot in diversity and inclusion and equity training, because if somebody is being slighted, let's say I don't like people with beards, just since I can hit half of our panelists with that comment.
Video game t-shirts, any of that, yeah.
Yeah. If I just make offhand remarks about how people with beards are untrustworthy, that is bad. And if Vanessa was to say, hey, wait a minute, you're not being respectful of people, and do this privately. I mean, I wouldn't say do it on a webinar like this, but to say privately, hey, wait a minute, did you realize the comments you made were impugning and negative and undermining the inclusiveness and the psychological safety that people need in order to be innovative and continue creativity. Those kinds of interactions can help take care of bad behavior or reduce bad behavior, while at the same time you hold up examples of good behavior.
Yep.
I just wanted to
Yeah,
jump in
psychological safety has. Go for it.
Sorry, I just want to jump back into something that Tony said that really echoed with me, right? Because, Tony was like, get a few like-minded people and just, go off and do the right thing. And I think, going back to the first question on SRE adoption and the process, I think we definitely had to do some of that, right? There were definitely people out there who were probably a bit skeptical, right? Initially of, okay, well, what is this going to bring to our team or, to our systems? And there's only so much talking you can do, right? So at some point, you're going to just put your foot down and go, let's just instrument those SLOs, build the probers, let's just get the data, and then we'll go from there. And I think, there's been examples where the first time where an SLO picks up a problem in production before your users noticed, suddenly it just clicks, right? And then everyone will be like, oh, okay, now I understand why this is of value. And then everyone will kind of jump on board, right? So I think that is actually very key to making sure that you have a successful onboarding and adoption as well.
We call that gratitude turning to hunger, right? You hit that, you're like, oh my gosh, that works. And then like, oh my gosh, that worked, right? If you're doing a ground level transformation, there's a whole bunch of things that you're looking for, but gratitude turning to hunger is one of the critical ones. I want to circle back around to psych safety really quick, because that is absolutely critical. And there are two main things that you can do if you're out there trying to figure this out. Research agile team agreements. Make the agreement beforehand about how we treat each other. While we all acknowledge people with beards are incredibly untrustworthy, what are they hiding, right? But on our team, we don't do that, right? We just don't do that. And the other part of psychological safety for a team is proper assertiveness. And proper assertiveness means if I'm sitting in a room, and this would happen at Pivotal, right? You're sitting in a room and someone's talking and they're done and you don't understand what's going on. Your obligation is to say, I don't understand. If I picked up this story, I wouldn't know what to do. And then, Chris might say, okay, you're new. And so this thing is weird and a pair will teach you. Okay, great. Or we might say, that story doesn't make any sense to me either. And then we take it out and rewrite it. But your proper assertiveness is you speak up when you don't understand, and you're also clear about your opinions and what informs them. But we would call it strong opinions loosely held. And these are tools that will help you through, because the trust building process, I'm so happy to hear everyone say it, like that's what SRE is. It's the trust building process across the organization. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Since we're pitching books, I gotta say that Agile Conversations that came out by Douglas Squirrel and Jeffrey Douglas, I think, last year, is a pretty amazing book and talks about analyzing how you carry on these conversations to up-level your conversational discussion capabilities.
Awesome. Moving on to topic number 3. We've been talking about organizational transformation, and one of the ways that you do that is to create that hunger for people. And a skill in this industry and as an adult is learning how to reframe a message to cater to an intended audience. And I'm particularly interested in how do you message or how do you cater a message about the benefits of SRE, the values of SRE, why it should be adopted. And I'm interested in it from how do you cater that message to an executive or to a middle manager or to an IC? So maybe Vanessa, let's start with you and an executive, since that's probably something you do often.
Yeah, so I think it doesn't really matter who the audience is, right? There's something in common, which is you have to articulate why what you're doing is going to be of use to them. Right. I think this applies across every level, right? It's not just executives or ICs. So then you really have to think about, okay, well, if I am talking to an executive, I'm trying to get sponsorship or buy-in to do this thing, what are the problems that they care about that they'll probably want to see addressed as a result of us implementing SRE? Is it to mitigate risk, right? Particular risks in the environment? Is it that they will end up being able to make operations more efficient, right? Maybe there are some dollar savings in there. You really have to think about the message and what they're going to get out of it, right? And pitch it that way. I mean, we also have a lot of business users who are not engineers at all, right? However, something that everyone at GS is good at is risk management, right? Traders might be thinking about their stock positions, right? Or, their portfolio. Is risk management in a different form. So then, how do you think about articulating that from not at the kind of technical level, but explaining to them that we want to do this because if your system goes down, you're going to be out of market at a minimum for this duration, right? And that is something that they can really get their head around. And so then they'll naturally understand what you're talking about.
That's fascinating because I don't think naturally in terms of risk management, but it sounds like, in a financial environment, that is a very common lens to analyze positions through. That's fascinating. Kurt, how would you message SRE or the value of SRE maybe to either a middle management or anyone?
I think that Vanessa was right in terms of identifying where their pain points are, what kinds of things keep them up at night, so to speak. Now, SRE isn't going to be the answer to all of those. I mean, maybe they tend to eat too heavy a meal at night, and so they can't sleep because of that. But on the other hand, if their problem is worrying about whether their product area, let's say, is going to be called on the carpet at the next executive review, monthly review or something, then the SRE principles of measure and know what you're shooting for and how you're measuring, how you're achieving or not achieving what you were aiming at, that's a valuable principle that can help them be prepared for that management review at the end of the month, as an example, and getting teams below them to help support that. Maybe there's automation that can save them a lot of time. Instead of having to spend 8 hours plugging numbers into a spreadsheet, it can be automated and rolled up out of some ticketing system or something. Those meet the kind of, it saves the toil for the managers, since we're talking middle managers as an example.
Cool. Tony?
For any kind of transformation like this, you have to have a high-low strategy. And for executives, there's kind of two ends of that high-low strategy. You can just sit down and say, look, what's an MBO I can help you meet, right? That person is transactional. They are just, they want to do something. If you do something good for them and build trust, they might listen to you better next time about another arena. All the way to, I search for that transformational executive. That executive who is just like that line person who read Accelerated is like, how come we're not doing this? I don't care if that person's like in shipping. Like, I want to go give that person, I want to make everything, I want to do everything I can to make that person effective with the tools. Sometimes with executives, I'll lower the shoulder and like hit them square on. I'm like, what's happened is software has been industrialized. Google is so much better than you that it's inconceivable. Like inconceivable. Like you're the buggy whip manufacturer now. Ford has done its thing. And if you keep sitting here pretending like what you're doing is acceptable, the world is going to erode out from under you. And if that's what I've had executives look me right in the face and say, I know you're right, I'm not going on this climb. And so I counsel that executive to leave as soon as they can. Find a successor who wants to do it and get there. Okay, the high problem is a problem. You get 90% of the time you do not get the high engagement. Low engagement is where you can engage instantly because you can just say, I love a structured complaining session. Let's just go into a room. What do you have in spades? Everyone has complaints. Just go into a room, allow people to complain for about an hour, spend half an hour categorizing the complaints into dilemmas, high cost to address and low cost to address. Throw dilemmas away and as a team agreement, agree not to revisit dilemmas more than say once every 6 months. And if you are a really ambitious team, pick one dilemma to assault And so you can assault one dilemma at a time, but don't spend any more emotional team energy on dilemmas for the next 6 months. Okay, so there you go. For the low side, I want to start with what people have, and people always have complaints. So, and we have so many tools to solve these complaints now. Let's just solve them.
Yeah, sounds like a facilitated retrospective with a very unique purpose in this space, which we, agile retrospectives are the core principle of the agile transformation process. Doesn't, no, why shouldn't it be the same for adopting SRE?
Yeah, that model scales all up and down the problem space.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think we have kind of one more topic that I'd like to cover before we move into the Q&A. So Vanessa, in your essay, you talk about a potential failure mode when SRE is pushed from top down and doesn't also have that bottom up style grassroots engagement. I have seen this, and in particularly, I've seen it with executives who've maybe read the book and are now asking for 4.9's availability for their services. And I know any SRE or team member who's on the call who is empathizing with this situation understands why that is so frustrating. Have you seen a similar kind of failure mode with these like really overly aggressive SLOs that are not based in reality? And if so, is there a way for an IC to maybe push back against that? What's the best way for someone who's maybe on the receiving end of something like that to participate?
Yeah, so I think two things. So first of all, you need to, if you're not at 4.9's, you need to be able to quantify where you are at this point in time, right? So you will need some data to back you up, right? And then, the conversation might then be, okay, maybe I'm running at 3.9's, but I'm not getting any complaints, right? Or, maybe the system simply does not need 4.9's, right? And so, if we're running at 3.9's and no one's complaining, the users are happy, would you still want to invest dollars into making the service 4.9's, right? Because we all know, like, the higher number of 9's we go, the more investment and more, we have to scale our infrastructure, eliminate all of the single points of failures, etc. It's going to cost money, right? And it is going to require a lot of re-engineering effort as well. So, do you still want that? And then have that kind of dialogue with leadership on that. And, I think people typically can kind of understand the pros and cons of both, right? So that's typically how I start. But you need data to back you up, right? So you need to be able to quantify.
That's a very good tactic. Kurt or Tony, do you have a way that an IC might be able to help?
Yeah.
It's along those lines, but I would say I'll harken back to Vanessa's risk management. There's a kind of a working spreadsheet that Google put out under their SRE, which is Customer Reliability Engineering moniker, that lets people estimate the risks and the frequency with which they expect those risks to hit them. So let's say they have planned maintenance, let's say, and it's 1 hour every week that they take the systems offline for planned maintenance. This spreadsheet will take that and translate it into, okay, as a result, you will never hit 4.9's. You'll never even hit 3.9's because you're burning it on planned maintenance. Now, I know some people like to give themselves a pass or a mulligan or something on planned maintenance, but it's still for your customers, they can't use your system. And for whatever reason, it doesn't really matter. They can't do what they want to do. So this spreadsheet, and I was hoping to find an easy way to provide a link to it. We'll have to add it in the show notes afterwards. Gives you a framework that you can estimate the frequency with which these incidents might occur, how impactful they are, how long they take to respond, and then what does that do to your 9's? As a way for people to get some sense of, okay, we want to move to 4.9's, but gee, that means we've got to fix all of these different things, and what it costs. You can extend.
Yeah, my thing is, it's funny, everything revolves around the 9's. So as an IC, you learn that 4 nines. So there are some things that you're just going to have as a mantra. The Google SRE book tells you to pick 28 days as your time. And if you don't take anything from this, pick that 28-day period, because you can reason about it as a human being. And so as an IC, you say we have a 28-day period, and then you say 4 nines is 4 minutes of that 28-day period. So, and Corey Innes, who was on, who dropped away, has a perfect presentation on this. And it's basically at 4 minutes, you're maybe at failover, but you may only be at failback. And so you have to have automated systems all the way through the stack. So all you do is you take out your path to production. You're like, it goes here, and it goes here, it goes here, it goes here. And then you're like, we don't have automation at any of these places. There's no toil elimination along this track. And so 4 minutes a month, not workable. Like you can laugh sorry for the executive listening, you can laugh an executive out of the room. You're like, do you know what you're talking about? Don't do that, right? Like I've made a career of doing that. I don't recommend as an IC you do that, but I do recommend that you say, look, I hear that you want 4 nines, right? There's actually no magic, and 4 nines is 4 minutes a month. And so if you know something we do want to know, right? Meanwhile, 2 nines is 4 hours a month. So that actually can have people in the loop. 4 nines can have no people in the loop. And so when you frame it up that way, executives are super clear about what's going on.
I think we're going to move into our Q&A session now. So anyone who's listening, if you have open questions, please use the Q&A section. One of them is very near and dear to this conversation that we just had. And it says, it's from Ravi Buragapu. Says, what's the perspective on error budgets, which is a more advanced or mature factor of SRE? How are organizations looking at this and adopting it? Is it actually required kind of standardization of consequences and alignment when it's breached?
We have a position on error budgets that's similar. I mean, Google will talk about their error budget situation as, I don't remember what system they talk about, but it routinely outperforms its error budget, so they take it offline on purpose, right? So the first thing is error budgets are treated by Google as very serious. So from our perspective, error budgets are what allow us to take risks. And this is not you can't answer this question in 5 minutes, right? Unfortunately, this one requires a step through a few things. But error budgets allow you to take a risk or to know when to turn the risk dial down, because you're violating your error budgets. You know, in the olden days, Google SREs would come out into the world. Before they had Kelsey and everyone, just plain SREs would be out in the world, and they would say, well, what you should do is retask half of your engineering team to fix bugs and increase reliability. And if they can't do it, you keep taking feature points away from them. So Google is very punitive about it. In the real world, that doesn't work. But error budgets are a big deal.
Vanessa?
Well, and I would also suggest that error budgets are how you get to the point that Vanessa described of catching things before they burn your customers. Essentially, it's back to what Tony pointed out. You have a target, you have a promise, and you have to have some way of evaluating, are you likely to breach this promise or not? And you can do it with, you can get really fancy, but you don't need to. Ultimately, you want to hit this level, and you're growing at this level over here, and you just do a straightforward extrapolation to start. I mean, you can get more sophisticated, and lots of people have, but it's like, okay, I'm increasing I've got an error budget of 132 minutes, let's just say, in this 28-day window. And I'm using up 2 minutes a day. And once a week I have a big incident where I'll burn half an hour. You take that half hour once a week, and you take the 2 minutes a day, and you add them up and say, am I going to be okay at the end of 28 days? And that's a start. That's an error budget. That's the start for your journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we definitely don't use error budgets to do hard blocks, right, of deployments or use error budgets. Well, if we have remaining budget, we certainly don't take systems down on purpose, right? As you can imagine, in our line of business, that's probably not really feasible. However, I guess having the data means that we can drive that risk management dialogue, right? And I think we do that, and that is important to the organization. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, we maybe need to move on. Sorry, we've got quite a few questions, and I'd like to get through at least a few of them. One of them from Angel Boskin says, I feel the SRE role description is still constantly being defined and varies a lot between companies. Would you say that you have an accurate definition of what SRE is as a role?
No.
No.
Yeah.
I think that it will be different from company to company, depending on the particular needs that are going on and the mix of the other roles that they have. And so I think that there are sort of common characteristics, but I don't think that there's hard edges that you can draw around it right now.
Become a trust builder, right? SRE is about giving a business tools to build trust in the system so they can take better risks. That's all it is. And so regardless of practice and how practice evolves, because practice will evolve with technology, your bottom level thing is trust and understanding so that the joints of your organization can understand what something far away is doing and how they make promises.
Yeah. The concept of reliability is obviously an important one. So, I think a lot of SRE role and responsibilities are trying to talk publicly about what reliability means and why it's important for the business and how you can engineer reliability. So I think that's maybe the closest that one could get. But as Craig says in the chat, SRE is more of a culture, and it being a role is maybe not an anti-pattern necessarily, but I would say a supporting structure for a culture, and less like the thing. Though you can do SRE without ever having an SRE role.
Yep. Sure.
Yeah. Let's see. One from an anonymous attendee says, I work at a customer in a platform DevOps team, and they use OKRs for goal setting. Our team struggles a bit with introducing and maintaining SRE principles alongside other OKRs. Do you have any experience with this, and can you share any hints or guidance?
Well, for me, it's all a matter of how empowered is the team to solve its own problems. And so if a top level OKR collides sideways with something the team needs to do to eliminate toil, then you're stuck in a positive feedback loop. And if the organization, if you're an IC, what you want to do is identify your positive feedback loops, your negative feedback loops, and the ones that are both well balanced, positive and negative. Because right there, that just, from a systems point of view, that just pops your problem space. And so OKRs have to, if OKRs say you need to be able to defy gravity, then you have to have a method to fold that back into the OKR. Like, hey, we don't have the anti-gravity machine yet. If you know something we don't, we'll take it, but we don't have that machine yet. And maybe we need to build it, things like that. So the OKR model, you can't say anything about it because probably the people who invented the philosophy of it are great at it. And everyone who read the article on it is like, oh, I'm going to call what I do OKRs. And okay. Okay. Well.
And I think that to a certain degree, it's like if you can get your objectives and your key results, which is how you measure achieving your objectives, it lines exactly, it can line up with what Tony was describing in terms of your promise, which is your objective, and your key results, which measure how successfully you achieve your objective. Now, if those are aligned with building trust and building reliability and breaking down silos, then everything should be good. If they're orthogonal, then they're not mutually supporting.
I was going to echo the same point, right? So key results are meant to be measurable. So actually, in order for you to be successful at delivering your OKRs, you probably will have to do apply the SRE principles and do certain things in your system to make sure that your OKRs are measurable, right? So actually, there is quite a lot of synergies between the two.
Yeah. All right.
And I think if you can have input, I mean, if your OKRs are imposed upon you, then that's probably a bit of a sign of a broken system in and of itself. And so the extent to which you can influence those objectives is where you will be building trust and other things in accord with an SRE approach.
Mm-hmm. One question we got in the chat from Francesco says, I have a question about the transformation to SRE. What do you suggest to use for SRE assessment to understand which level of maturity your organization is at or how they measure SRE? I'm interested if any of the other panelists have anything concrete about this, but I actually did want to mention that Blameless is going to be coming out with some content specifically around this topic because we're at the level where organizations are looking for leadership in terms of understanding what SRE means, what SRE principles and practices are at their organizations, and how to think about where to go next. Do any of you know of any existing tools or topics?
I don't like the framing of this question.
Okay.
Here's what I would say. If you want an assessment of your organization, you say, what percentage of my teams at the 95th percentile deliver via a machine? So if I have a 10-step path to production, how many of those 10 steps are delivered via machine only? There's no other way to do it. I don't care how ugly the process is in between. That right there will tell you a maturity of automating in your organization. And SRE is an automation discipline. That's the whole thing. And so to the extent that you have the most obvious processes like commits not going through continuous integration systems, if your commits are not going through continuous integration systems, that is the highest leverage thing you can do. If you're looking at the SRE book and you're like, I have to do all of this, I would say set it aside and get Martin Fowler's continuous integration book and start teaching that, because that will move you further along than anything else. And then start rolling in SRE. But notice that if you have CI, all of a sudden measurement becomes really straightforward on a lot of things. And so that kicks the iteration cycle. You're going to speed up the iteration cycle across path to production. Don't evaluate SRE if you don't have any CI in your organization. If you have CI below the 95th percentile, start working to get it to the 95th percentile, because that's what you need.
Anyone else to quickly chime in?
Yeah, so I mean, again, SRE, there are many, I would say, foundational things to doing SRE, right? So observability is another one, right? Clearly, you can also measure where your teams are at in terms of maturity around observability. Are you only doing white box monitoring, for example? Do you have you got customer journeys mapped out and you probing, etc.? So I think, I mean, Tony mentioned CI/CD. I think another area to look is observability. And then, another place might be, incident management, right? Do you have closed loop processes? Do you really have blameless postmortems? And do you really follow up on, actions, right, to remediate stuff after incidents happen, right? So I think you can measure it. It's going to be across a number of different things, right? Because, SRE is a broad discipline that covers many aspects.
And I'll pick on the terminology just because that sometimes I like to pick on semantics. And I think maturity models are an antiquated concept. I much prefer Nicole Forsgren's way of phrasing it as sort of like stepping stones. That there are many paths that people pursue in their journey of continuous improvement. And if they are improving, then those are good paths. And the fact that you're on one path and I'm on a different path is more contextual than an absolute. So.
I think we have one last question. We've got maybe a minute or two, so let's choose one person to answer this. But Dan Loomis says, after we get past executive buy-in, what's the next milestone towards bootstrapping an SRE practice between platform and app teams? Is it establishing joint SLOs and error budgets?
Yeah.
From experience, what we did definitely was around observability. Like where we had gaps with that was the place to start, because again, you need to be able to measure, right? Unless you can measure it, you can't really do anything at all about it. So yeah.
So
Yeah, I go
exactly.
back to Mickey Dickerson's pyramid, that monitoring is the foundation of successful practice.
Yeah.
Whether it's monitoring, which was the old term, or observability, which is a slightly more expansive term.
Sure. So even before you get to the point of like setting SLOs between platform and apps teams, it's really ensuring that platform and apps teams have a shared understanding and are, monitoring and observing their production systems. Yeah. Awesome.
I have a slight thing. So a slight difference. So when you get executive buy-in, what you want to find is what I call the transformation executive, a person who for 3 to 5 years can carry the weight of this whole thing. I think of this person like a talk show host, because he or she is going to be going into other people's offices and sitting down and saying, hey, there are these great practices that are well established, blah, blah, blah. And the person whose office will be like, get out. They're like, great, I'll see you next week. Because they're going to have to run this loop on all of this stuff, because the organization starts producing results. And so you want a focus for those results. So that's what I would do.
Awesome. Well, we're pretty much at time. So I wanted to thank all of our panelists and attendees for joining us on this first of our rebooted Blameless industry panels. I wanted to tell our attendees that we are always looking for panelists to join us. So if you or anyone that you know is interested, please reach out to Blameless either via Twitter or I'm chris@blameless.com. You can message me. Our next panel does not have a date yet, but please follow our Twitter for information about when that's going to be happening next. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.